Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So welcome to Startup Grind, everybody. Let me tell you a little bit about Startup Grind. It is a global network of cities and entrepreneurs who are passionate about entrepreneurship and getting their companies started. So it was started as a nonprofit organization. It is now supported by Google for Entrepreneurs. Today there are over 170 cities around the world that are Startup Grind cities. We're really pleased to have gotten Winston-Salem on the map as a Startup Grind city, and we represent the Triad region, okay? So the benefit of being a Startup Grind city and being involved in the Startup Grind network is that there's a website that's really rich, very rich with videos from lots of entrepreneurs that have been very successful in their careers. So basically it's a treasure trove of videos of successful entrepreneurs telling their stories. So these are the folks that have gone before you. These are the ones that have lots of experience to share with you, and it's a great trove of information and inspiration. The second part of Startup Grind that's really important is the network. So there's a website that we're connected with that connects you to over 23,000 startup entrepreneurs all over the world, and it's a great way to post information, to ask for domain experts to help you out, to look for co-founders. So it's a really great way for Flywheel and for our community of entrepreneurs to get connected globally through the Startup Grind organization. So let me go ahead and get into the introduction of tonight's speaker. So tonight we have with us Ryan Pratt, who is the founder of Guerrilla RF. He founded Guerrilla RF in 2013 after winning an NC IDEA grant. Speaking of which, we are going to have an NC IDEA grant info session coming up in August, so keep your eyes out for that, because it is a great opportunity to apply for, that initial tranche of money that can kind of get you started off. So Ryan won the NC IDEA grant in 2013, and he's gone on to raise over $3.5 million in investment capital in I guess 2.5 years, which is a pretty amazing track record. Guerrilla RF has over 20 semiconductor chip designs in the pipeline, and it's on its way to being a leading player in mobile infrastructure. So please give a big Winston-Salem shout out to Ryan Pratt, tonight's speaker. Come on, Ryan.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So, Ryan, is your mic on? I want to make sure you're mic'd up.
Yep.
All good?
Okay,
so we like to begin with backstory and kind of hear from you kind of how you got started down the entrepreneurial path. You went to NC State as an electrical engineer. So tell us about that experience. Tell us about coming out of NC State and kind of what you learned about entrepreneurship while you were there.
Sure. At NC State in the electrical engineering department, they had a special studies course, entrepreneurship and engineering. So I took that class. It was pretty interesting. Certainly my story kind of goes back to my father. He co-founded RFMD back in 1991. They're a big wireless semiconductor company based out of Greensboro. And so, but anyway, at NC State, certainly taking that class was interesting. They had speakers come in, and we were able to learn a lot about some of the things that were going on in the startup community.
So you came out of NC State and went on to RF Micro,
Correct.
Which is a company that your father founded how long ago?
So he founded it in '91, and I started there in 2000.
Great. So you went kind of into the corporate world, right, in terms of RF Micro, and then some changes occurred there. So tell us kind of the story leading up to Guerrilla RF? Because you've had a couple of corporate experiences, and it would be interesting to learn kind of how that prepared you for what you're doing today.
Sure, absolutely. When I started out of school, I really had no idea that I was going to go on to found a startup company. I was just looking to be an engineer and learn the trade. So I was at RFMD for 8 years in a technical design position and moving up into management. And then in 2008, I left RFMD to start a design center for one of their competitors, Skyworks. And in retrospect, that turned out to be a very good experience because at Skyworks, I was tasked with starting this design center, so it was just me by myself, tasked with building a team, an entire product execution team. So all the pieces to develop new products in our industry, I had to recruit, get those people on board, get the equipment. I was in charge of the budget. Everything from toilet paper to recruiting and retaining talent was up to me there. So we got it to over 50 people at the peak in 2013.
Cool. So you kind of had a startup experience within a corporate umbrella.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So what happened? Why'd you leave Skyworks?
Well, in a story that isn't too different from my father's, I got laid off. There was the executive management over me. That executive left. He was a very good boss, so definitely a mentor for me. And when he left the company, another executive took over, and so he cleared out all the staff of the old guy, in order to install his own leadership, people he knew and felt comfortable with. So I got laid off.
So it was kind of a forced move, so to speak.
Yes, yes.
So the semiconductor business has huge players, right? So what gave you the confidence and the chops to go out and start your own semiconductor business? I mean, that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me was having been laid off. I felt like I didn't have a whole lot of options. The local companies in the area, there was a couple of them, had worked at both of them. Didn't see options there. I think moving away just wasn't an option for me. I very much wanted to keep myself and my family here in the area. And so, it was funny, my father and my wife were both just kind of like, well, it's easy, just start a company. There you go. And at first, I was just like, well, that's ridiculous. I can't start a company. You need this brilliant idea and like the next iPhone or something, and that'll never work. And so it took me several weeks to where in my head I started thinking, well, if I were going to do it, what are the things I would need to do in order to do that? So
to get it all lined up. So
yep.
You told me you're a big fan of Mark Suster's blog.
Yes, correct.
And Mark Suster started Upfront Ventures after selling his company to Salesforce.com. So tell us about that. Tell us why you're a big fan of his and kind of what kind of learnings you got out of that.
Sure. It was funny. Once I did decide, okay, I think I'm going to do this startup thing, I just voraciously began trying to learn about it. And I stumbled upon his blog site, and and there's several other good blogs, but it was comprehensive in his archives of all these, over the years, all these articles on every different aspect, from what investors look for to customers, sales process, to what a CEO's job is. What are the things you need to focus on? And I'll mention one of the biggest concepts that really stuck with me was he talks about learning before earning. And I realized that, in fact, that's what I had been doing. And what he means is that if you're going to start up a company or work in a startup, you need to understand that business. You need to understand that industry, the market, the players. And, that's how you can really increase your odds of being successful or going on to earn when you do your startup. And so when I look back at my past, that's what it was. I was learning the industry inside and out, making contacts with key people, relationships, and talent.
Right. So, I mean, this kind of touches on getting good advice and the value of mentors along the way. And
Sure.
I think you mentioned that one of your best mentors is a fellow that's here tonight, Sam Funches with the Nussbaum Center. So
Yes.
thank you for coming tonight, Sam. So talk about that. What made that experience so rich and valuable for you, and how did it help you get through the valley of death before you started climbing into success?
Sure. I think mentorship is absolutely critical. I was very fortunate. Of course, I have my father. That's a resource many don't have. I had people like Sam who were incredibly helpful. Reading some of these blogs were important. But I think for me, it was just talking with many different people and figuring out those who could give me the information and, even just the emotional support. I remember when I first met Sam, he told me, he said, this is going to be a roller coaster ride. And, you've got to be prepared for that. And you need to learn to, kind of try and stay within the bands of reasonableness, not overexcited, not over depressed. And that's definitely very much been the case. You can't function when you're either overexcited about something or you're depressed. It's the end of the world. You've got to learn to modulate your emotions to try and stay in that effective region. So that was one of many bits of good advice along the way.
That is really good advice. So how did you form your team, right? So this was kind of a forced situation. You decided to go on your own. How did you develop your team and kind of get this thing off the ground?
Sure. So that kind of goes back to just, having been in the industry, I knew the kinds of products I wanted to work on. I knew there was no local company that would hire me to do it. And so in knowing the kinds of products I wanted to work on, I already knew the people who would very highly likely join me because they're all people I had worked with, people both at RFMD, at Skyworks, and other places. So for me, I was in a very fortunate position that the team really came to me in many ways. Once they heard what I was doing and it was so close to what they wanted to do, they were just like, when can we start? So
yeah, that's something that's really consistently stated in all of our fireside chats that we do with Startup Grind is the importance of developing the relationships and developing the network, early on, and working really aggressively at doing that, because you never know, when you are going to need to assemble a team and who the players are going to need to be. But in your case, that came through the corporate experiences. I mean, they came with you when the opportunity arose.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
that kind of speaks to your credibility with your team members too, right? So how do you describe your culture? I mean, that's a topic that comes up a lot when startups are getting off the ground and trying to figure out the personality of their company, the kind of culture that they're going to want to develop. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, that's one of the values of being on your own, right? Is you can set your own culture. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think culture is something that I somewhat struggle with. I know what I want. Our core values are employee friendliness. We don't want a super rigid hierarchy. I think for us, in our particular case, family is very important. And so these are the values that we've kind of laid out, and really it's implemented and reflected through the people we bring on the team. We're, again, in a fortunate position where we have many, many talented, qualified people who could join us. But, we're somewhat selective in that who is the cultural fit, who shares those core values with us. And
Gotcha.
we've been very fortunate to get that as well.
Okay, so let's kind of get into the execution area, right? So In the semiconductor business, I mean, there's a whole lot of pathways, right? So how did you create a unique value proposition about what you were going to go after? I mean, there are many market segments. Where did you go? What did you decide to focus on?
Yeah, and I'm going to be a bit of a broken record here, but again, it was having been in the industry, working at those other companies, almost every day we would have customers come in requesting these kinds of products, and it was just, no, we don't have the resources, there's no one to work on that. Apple has a new chip for their iPhone, they're going to buy way more, let's put everyone on that. And so over the years, you just see dozens and dozens of these ideas that customers are begging for these kinds of products. And no, maybe they're not Apple or Samsung, but there's still a very nice business there. That, the idea pops in your head that, well, man, if we could build a company to deliver those kinds of products, there's a built-in market, there's demand already there.
So, so your market slice, you're on the infrastructure side, right?
Correct.
So tell the audience a little bit specifically about what you do focus on in terms of how these chips actually apply in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So again, our focus is on the infrastructure side. So think of the big cell towers you see driving down the highway, or even the Wi-Fi access points you'll see in your home or office. These are the devices that your mobile devices talk to, that hook you into the network. And so our products, what we do is we enable these infrastructure devices to have a larger coverage area. So now you can cover a building or a certain area of a city with fewer fixed capital equipment, because now one piece of equipment can cover up to 50% more area.
Gotcha. So, and most of these are commercial contracts. Have you done any federal work? I mean, I know a lot of companies that are in your line of business kind of go after Defense Department grants and that kind of thing. Did you try that out?
Yeah, that's definitely an option, and I think for many companies it's a good option to to seek out federal funding and grants. DARPA has many grants for these kinds of products. We ended up not doing that because those contracts have a very long lead time. It's, you apply and then it can be 6 months until you find out if you got it or not. Then it can be another 2, 3, 6 months before you get the money. And so we felt that our products had enough commercial pull that we didn't want to be slowed down. And so in our case, the alternative was to raise money from investors.
Gotcha. So there's a really fascinating story here, I think, for our audience in terms of you started in 2013 and you're already at a kind of a Series B fundraising level, right? So it started with the NC Idea grant. We do have an information session coming up on that. So tell us about that experience. What was it like to apply? What was it like to go through the evaluation process? And what did you get out of that was valuable later on?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize enough that NC Idea was really the make or break for our company. I think applying for the grant took time, but to me it was very obviously the ticket. It was the way for us to get where we wanted, because the grant money, in our case, the grant money was to be used for our first prototypes. And all the feedback we got from investors was, well, this is interesting, this is neat, but is your technology going to work? And so, being able to pay to fabricate those prototypes was a huge deal. So I put a lot of time into the grant application. I literally spent months developing the business plan, thinking things through from A to B, trying to anticipate what some of the obstacles would be. They want to see that you've thought through the business plan. It doesn't need to be like a 1,000-page document. It just needs to be thought through. And so, we applied. We made it through the first round. And then I think you get to tweak. Yeah, there's an initial short form that you apply with. Then you do the long form. That's much more of the business plan. So again, put a lot of time into that. Only had a couple weeks to turn that, and then we were fortunate enough that we made it to the finals where you go in and you pitch. And I can tell you that was probably the most stressful day of my life.
So who helped you with putting that pitch together? I mean, did you do that on your own, or did you get some coaching from people in the community about how to do that?
Sure, certainly. Sam reviewed that for me. I had my father review it. I had my wife review it. And I just spent so much time trying to refine it and get it exactly where I wanted it. But
Did they have kind of a prescriptive format to follow in terms of what the pitch deck needed to cover, or did you choose your own?
No, it was more or less choose your own. They give you the bullet points that they want covered, not necessarily the order in which to do it. So it's up to you to make sure that you're covering these bullet points.
Okay. So when we talked earlier, I think you said within a month after getting the grant, you were approached by Pan to do an investment round, right?
Yeah, so we've been speaking with Pan all along. And
So Pan is Piedmont Angel Network,
correct.
which is our local angel investment group.
Yep. So I'd been speaking with them all along, had even pitched to them. I think I ended up using almost the same pitch deck from the idea final. And, and also several other individual angel investors. And, once it was announced we had won the grant, within a month, the investment started coming in. And so within 3 months of winning that grant, we had brought in a $1 million seed Series A round.
Yeah, so the important thing for the audience is you never stop, right? So even though you were going through the NC Idea grant process, you were also talking to other investors and just continuously working it to be in a position to kind of accelerate that next round of funding.
Yeah, absolutely, because they need to know who you are. They need to be interested in the idea. And in our case, I think when we won the idea grant, it gave us instant validation because that idea grant competition is held in very high esteem. There's a lot of really smart people that participate in that. So if you make it through that's seen to be a very effective filter. And I think that really just gave us instant credibility with a lot of the investors we were speaking with.
So the funding is always associated with milestones. How long does it take to kind of get a chip through the prototype stage and in initial market testing? What does that look like, timeline?
Sure. So first you have to design the chip in CAD software. That takes anywhere from a week to a couple months. Then you send it off for fabrication at a factory. That takes about a month.
And where is that factory? U.S., China?
Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Yep. And so then after you get the chip back, you have to assemble it and get it ready for test and test it. That takes another 4 to 6 weeks to test it and then get the data on it and make sure it's working and maybe tweak it.
So did the grant and the first $1 million raise that came from Pan, did that put you in a position to start production?
No, that was enough. The NC Idea grant enabled us to fabricate our first prototypes. And then right after, at about the same time, that was when the investment money came in. And honestly, that money was the money that allowed us to hire the team. Because, again, all these folks that wanted to join the team, they were all in a position where they needed paychecks. And so as soon as we got that money in, we began hiring the core team in.
Okay, so that $1 million was basically spent on additional design and prototyping and all that kind of stuff. So
correct.
So when do you go into production on the timeline? This is 2015. How many chips have you got in production?
So as of today, we have 10 parts in production, and we have another 10 coming very soon. Really, what enabled us to get into production was a Series B that we raised in May.
Right. So you had a bolt-on round to your Series A, right?
Yes,
which
correct.
was around $500,000.
Correct.
And how did that happen? Did that just come out of the blue, or did tell us how that bolt-on occurred?
Well, I think we saw an opportunity to accelerate our development and get a couple products, prototypes, into the hands of some very key customers. And so we went to our investors and said, if we had an extra $500,000, we could develop these new products in addition to what we're already developing. And we think that those could be very high runners in a couple years.
Okay, gotcha. And then shortly after that, you just closed on a Series B round in May.
Yes.
Right? So a lot of activity. One of the things I think startup teams in the audience kind of worry about is how much time does all this take, because you're trying to get your company going. In your case, you had a fairly sizable team for an early stage startup. So how much time did it take out of your day to make sure that these investment activities were going on?
Sure. When you're fundraising, it takes anywhere from 10% to 90% of your time. I would say on average, it's at least half of your time. And to be honest, that was one of the things that our lead Series B investor was also a prior investor. And, he told me, he said, I want to lead this round because I want you executing and delivering the product and not out talking to people like me. So that was very fortunate. I was like, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good lesson there. So the relationship with investors is kind of a scary thing too, right? Because essentially they become very significant business partners, right? They
Sure.
want to know a lot about your business, and in some cases want to run your business for you. Have ideas about the performance of the company. So tell us what you've learned, and tell us what good practices are about investor relations, and how to make sure that that's a positive relationship and runs smoothly.
Sure. I think the first thing along the way is being selective with your investors. At the end of the day, you need money, and if someone's willing to write a check, you're certainly going to consider it. But I think, at least in the beginning, picking who you approach is important, because you need to find people who can get what you're doing and who really, in many ways, you're building a relationship where they trust you. If an investor doesn't trust you, those are the ones that are going to try and get overly involved in the business and run things. In my case, our investors know actually very little about the semiconductor industry, but they've seen my track record. Many of them are aware of RFMD and my father's track record. And so because of that, they've been ideal in that they're like, all right, you know how to run this. We trust you to run it. We're going to ask you a lot of questions and, give us your plan and walk us through it. But once we pull the trigger, it's up to you to run it.
So do any of the investors along the way, do they have board seats? Are they represented on the board of directors of the corporation?
Actually, most of them are not. Our largest shareholders are not on the board. Our board is composed of 5 people. One is myself. One is a person I appoint, which is Sam. And then the investors get 3 seats now. So the investors nominated my father as one of their seats, and then also Andy Dreyfus with Piedmont Angel Network. Since they led the Series A, they got a seat. And then finally, the 5th seat is our Series B lead investors nominated someone to represent them.
Okay. And so how frequently do you communicate with
Sure.
with the rest of the investment group? So obviously the board, the folks that are on the board, that's a formal relationship, and there's repeat opportunities for them to interact and kind of dig into the financials and the milestones that you're achieving. But what about the rest of the investors? How do you keep them informed?
Sure, absolutely. And that was some of the best advice I got in the very beginning from one of my first investors was to proactively communicate with the investors. I try to, every month, month and a half, I send out an email update to all the investors. And, I found that keeps everyone in the loop. It minimizes questions and disruptions to me. And I think it also helps the investors feel like they know what's going on. So when they're at the golf course bragging to their buddies that, yeah, I'm in this startup, they understand what's going on with the business. And so that's been very, very helpful because, again, it keeps them out of my way because they're proactively learning about what we're doing. And I think it builds trust because they're seeing, they can go back in their email and see, here's what he said he was going to do, and, well, gee, look, he did. So that helps establish credibility by hitting those milestones and keeping everyone up to date.
So let's kind of cover some do's and don'ts, right? So for educational purposes, for the folks that are, going down the startup path, what are the most important things you would say? These are things you really should focus on because you've learned the hard way that it's important stuff. And what are some things that you would recommend that they really avoid getting a company off the ground?
Sure. So, well, that's really open-ended, but
Yeah.
I think in my case, the biggest thing for me, the first step was convincing myself that this was the path I wanted to go down. Because I think, in honesty, many of the tough questions and roadblocks investors threw up to me when I spoke with them were questions I had thrown up to myself. And if you can't convince yourself that you have a clear plan with clear milestones and you know how to hit those milestones, then you're not going to get very far if you can't do that. And so I think myself as a checkpoint, it started there. And then from there, as I said, I think milestones, setting them early is critical. When you hit them is also a huge piece of your credibility. In our case, almost all of our investors are repeat investors. And the reason I believe they keep investing is we hit our milestones. We've laid them out. They're very clear. We will have this many design wins. We will have this many products. We will have these many products in mass production. All these concrete milestones that anyone can check and verify. We've communicated them and we've hit them really well.
So what's a mistake? Give us a mistake that you would share with us that something we should avoid.
Well, there's many of those that I've learned along the way. I think one big thing is, again, in the fundraising side, under anticipating how long it's going to take. And everyone told me the fundraising is going to take twice as long as you think. And I was like, yeah, sure, okay, I'm just going to go do it and everything will be fine. And no, it took 2 to 3 times at least as long as I thought. And, that was important for us because we're burning cash. There are people I'm paying who have families. And, watching that bank account drain and drain and drain and drain is very stressful. And so getting out, getting ahead of the fundraising, getting out there, talking with people and trying to move it along in a semi-timely fashion is important. And, at the end of the day, though, it's not up to you when these investors will make their decision. And so, again, I would say I learned the hard way. You definitely need to raise sooner than later. And I've learned that, I think I've learned from other people's mistakes that, the old adage, when you can raise money, take it. You should always be in the mode of raising money because it's tough.
Okay, so I want to open it up to the audience for some questions, and I'll kind of hand the microphone around so that we can capture the questions on the video. So, do we have any questions for Mr. Pratt here? Okay.
Yes, I was wondering, what was the biggest surprise? I mean, we all have things that we didn't expect, but I mean surprise in a nice way. What were you not ready to have happen that you went, holy cow, this is great?
There have been a bunch of those. I think in our case, honestly, the biggest surprise for me is how well we've stuck to our original plan, both financially and time-wise. I pulled up my original slides from mid-2013, and we're within a month today of what we said, we would be where, because I never expected that we would, you have to put together a plan, you have to have a timetable, and I put a lot of thought into it, but I was just like, this is an exercise, this is rough, we'll see. So I'd say that was one of the biggest surprises, that we actually were able to stick to that plan.
If you're willing to share this, how much equity did it actually cost you to get the $3.5 million?
To get the $3.5 million? So, well, I can put it in fairly broad terms. I would say investors own roughly half of the company at this point, maybe a little bit more.
So I'll follow up on that. So what kind of coaching did you get on that? Because that can be pretty complicated in terms of the decisions around managing your cap table and how much to give and all that kind of stuff. Who advised you on that?
Honestly, that was 90% Mark Suster and 10% my corporate lawyer. And I think in terms of understanding the deal terms and what you can negotiate and what you can't, that was a lot of research, understanding things like liquidation preferences and all these things that get thrown at you, all these legal concepts and deal terms. There's a ton of resources out there, and I just read and read and read and still didn't understand, so read it again. And then there were a few left, so our corporate lawyer took the time and explained it.
Who's Mark Suster? Who's Mark Suster?
He's a venture capitalist who started a company and sold it to Salesforce.com, and his blog is Both Sides of the Table.
Yeah, really, really good resource information. So more questions?
So in those early days, it was you with some good people around you. How did you initially start to build your team? And how do you think about your team now that you're at a Series B level of a venture?
Sure. So, in the very early days, it was just me and a laptop. And it seemed like it was that way for a while. Once the team came on board, getting them on board, again, I think it was always clear to me who the team was going to be because these were people that had come to me. And, and I knew they were people that I had worked with. I knew what to expect. I knew they had the experience and competence that we needed. And, that's another key thing that I'll mention is when building your team, you've got to bring in people that cover the bases that you don't. I'm a pretty technical guy. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not an operations person, and I'm not a customer support person. And so those were the very first people I spoke to because I knew where my strengths was developing new products, being technical, but all these other areas, I needed people to help me there. And my motivation was kind of selfish in that I just didn't want to deal with that stuff. And so that was one of the things that drove me to bring in a diverse team that could cover all these key areas.
You knew most of the team members.
From your prior engagements, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they kind of followed you. So you had it a little easier than some, I think,
Oh, yeah.
in terms of being able to assemble the team. So
And I guess the second part to the question was kind of, how do I think of it where we are today? And I would say still very much the same way. I'm always looking for what skill sets, what needs do we need that we don't have. And so that's very much, how, and that's kind of how I learned to do it when I started that design center for Skyworks. It was, it takes a lot of different pieces to create a product development engine and to sell it, market it, and support it. And so all these different pieces, just constantly thinking about who can I get? Who do I know that's really good at that? Because we need that right now.
okay, we got one back here.
Based on what you mentioned earlier in terms of the relationships you have with folks who, when you were working for other companies, were asking for products that didn't yet exist, to what degree today are you designing products based on people coming to you and asking for something specific? And to what degree are you sort of looking down the road and anticipating what's coming and building products that people don't know they need yet? And then for the latter category of stuff, how are you then going out and having conversations with potential customers?
Sure, absolutely. I think in our case, it's very much, I think some of the initial products, our very first patent was what customers had given us feedback to. I think there's another well-known person out there, Steve Blank, and one of his concepts is get out of the building. And that was actually one of the first things Sam pounded into me was, yeah, I'm sure this technology is really cool, but you need to go talk to some customers. Do they value what you're working on? And of course I was like, well, sure they do. I know they'll love it, but it was a good point. And so it was funny because as I was calling up venture capitalists who all said no, I said, well, can you at least put me in touch with this customer who you invested in? And amazingly, they were more than happy. I spoke to several CEOs of even publicly traded companies who were more than happy to put me in touch with their CTO, their technical team, so I could have just a 15, 20-minute phone conversation. Here's my product. Here are the specs I think I can do. Is this interesting to you? And so we got a lot of great feedback from that, and that helped validate the initial technology. Today, I would say it's kind of a mix. We've been fortunate in that we'll have customers come to us and say, we're looking for this thing. And then we're like, okay, if we see how other customers would also be interested in that product, then we're all over it. Those are the kinds of things we take off and do. We've kind of shied away from one-off, very custom solutions because we're trying to build a catalog business. That's the nature of the business we want to build.
So I think there's two really, really good important lessons there. One is having a customer come to you and say, it would be great if you would deliver this specific product for me, really cuts down on your R&D cost, right? But you got to make sure that it's not kind of like a one-off feature or a one-off situation where there's, the market is just that one customer as opposed to a whole universe of customers, right? So
Sure.
So it's great to have that opportunity, but you gotta validate it in terms of your own business case, whether or not it's something you really want to pursue.
Yeah, exactly. And one of our most successful products now, a customer came to us with a requirement, and we looked at it, and we basically told the customer, no, this isn't what you want. We think this is a better fit. And we showed them something different. They loved it, and now their 3 competitors have designed it in too. And so that was a great example of where we were strategic with the product, and we're able now to sell it to several big customers.
Okay, I think we got time for a couple more questions. Anybody else? Yeah.
So are you still burning cash? And do you see yourself having to raise more money anytime soon? And do you have any patents on what you're developing now that you see in the future is going to be a golden egg?
So yes, we're burning cash. We wouldn't be a startup if we weren't. I think in terms of raising additional funds, we'll see. Our plan is that our Series B gave us enough money that it should get us through to when we reach break even next year. In reality, will we probably have to raise more money? Almost definitely. And to be honest, even once we do reach break even, we may still choose to raise additional funds. I think we'll figure that out based on the opportunities we see. It always comes down to if somebody was going to give me an extra $2 million, could I accelerate the business with it? And so if we see that opportunity, then yeah, we'll raise more. But our main focus now is getting to that break-even point where I feel like a lot more options come open to us. Things like venture debt, maybe less dilutive or non-dilutive options become available.
Okay, one more question.
Well, and he asked about the patent.
That's
And so we
after
do.
this question.
Yes. So we have one patent currently, and looking ahead, I'm sure we'll have additional patents. There's nothing imminent around the corner. But in our industry, there's many kinds of IP. There's trade secrets, even copyright. When we actually draw our circuits for the factory to implement them, that's covered by copyright law. So there are many layers of intellectual property, and any company that innovates should certainly be generating that IP, and we are.
So small follow-on, it would be kind of interesting, just roughly, how much of your initial capital have you had to invest in IP protection?
Not very much. Actually, the NCIDEA grant, the second part that funded was our initial patent application for the patent we got. So the patent we have now cost about $10,000 to $15,000, and then there's probably going to be another $5,000 of follow-up paperwork, and because there's a second patent along with the first. So it's not huge. It doesn't break the bank. It's cheap, really, to get that protection.
Okay, any more? Got time for one more. And it's a wrap. Give Ryan a big hand.